Okay, let's start again. Hi, I'm John. Welcome to Hope Church of Berlin. Clap. So we're looking at chapter 3, verses 1 to 5, and it starts with, there we go. Are we beginning to praise ourselves again? Which is a weird way to start a chapter, because it's, so if you haven't caught the rest of our series so far, 2 Corinthians is written by Timothy and Paul, I think mostly Paul, but he's saying, are we beginning to praise ourselves again? Which begs the question, what were they saying that made them say this? So I'm going to have to do something I really don't like doing, which is going to have to go back to what someone said in the previous week for this to actually make sense. So, Ryan, last week, does anyone remember the cookies? Yeah. So, Paul and Timothy were talking about them having this aroma, that they were part of, was it the triumphant procession? Where Romans would come back from a victory and there'd be this procession, this carnival almost of people coming down, and there'd be people with smelly stuff burning, and to those who had won, that's like, that's the smell of victory, and to those who got beaten, they're like, oh, we lost, that's the smell of defeat almost. And Ryan was saying how we are going to be this amazing aroma, we're going to be this pleasing smell to Christ, and put up a picture of cookies, which always gets my attention because I love cookies. And it reminded me when Ryan was saying that actually about, there's a place in Birmingham called the Bull Ring. Has anyone been to the Bull Ring in Birmingham? Yeah, cool. I'm not sure if it's still there, but when I used to visit Birmingham years and years ago, there was a place called Millie's Cookies. It's still there, cool. And what I found was that no matter where you came into that shopping centre, you could smell Millie's Cookies. It was amazing. You'd walk in any door and go, oh, that's amazing. And my friend Ben at the time was convinced that they'd hooked up that oven or something to like the ventilation system of the whole thing to bring people to buy their cookies. But it's a similar thing to that. You don't walk into that and go, ugh, cookies. No one in their right mind would do that. But if you walk, you'd walk in and go, wow, cookies, I would love cookies. And what Paul and Timothy are sort of saying a little bit is like, if you smell that smell is a good smell. And if that smell is bad to you, it's not the fault of the smell, the problem is your nose. Saying that, it's a victory smell to those who are being saved, to those who are coming to know Jesus more. It's the other, if you're offended by what it is that they're saying, then actually maybe you're on the wrong side of this battle. So that's the first thing they said. They say, we smell amazing. They also say, we are not like the many hucksters who preach for personal profit. I love the NLT translation for this of hucksters. You don't see that often in the Bible, do you? But the word many here that really threw me. It's not like we're not like the one or two that are peddling the gospel for personal profit. It's like we're not like the many. And the Greek word for many there is what gets used now as poly. And a number of years ago, sorry, younger people, you won't appreciate this at all, but there was a point where your phone went from monophonic ringtones to polyphonic ringtones. And it was mind-blowing. Your phones up to that point could only manage like one tone at a time. And it was like, oh wow, it now has other things happening. There's multiple things happening at the same time. This is amazing. And it's that many, polyphonic, many, it's lots. And that's pretty shocking, really, isn't it? Because, we'd never have this nowadays at all, would we? You wouldn't find people preaching for personal profit or doing anything crazy. Oh, where did that come from? Yeah, it's still a problem. It's upsetting, but there are people who are using the gospel on their platform and everything to actually benefit themselves and like, I'll have another personal jet, please. It's annoying, but it's a thing. And I know that people in Rhydyfelin that I've talked to on occasion have been like, oh, got more followers? Have you got more people paying into your coffers? That kind of stuff. And it actually can be quite a thing for people to get over. They can think that we're in it to make profit. And Paul particularly can instantly squash that because Paul, click, no, it's got to go, made tents. Many of you will know that Paul, in fact, when I was speaking a while ago about Priscilla and Aquila, Paul got on really well with them because they were tent makers like him. And Paul sort of almost funded himself with his tent making ministry. And I can appreciate that to a certain extent. He was bivocational. And I myself, I do lots of stuff for the church, but I also work Monday to Thursday as a web developer. And so when Paul says about I think it's 1 Corinthians 9, again, working off memory, so feel free to fact check that. Paul says about not sort of doing this so as to not hinder the gospel. So that when he has those kind of conversations with people saying, oh, you're in this for personal profit, he can go, well, actually, no, I support myself. I'm not in this for personal profit, just so nothing would get in the way of the gospel message coming through to people. So I kind of get that, and that's one of the reasons why I think even if I reduced my hours at work, I don't think I'd ever go down to maybe less than 3 days, because I want to be able to support myself. But it's worth saying that there are so many places in the Bible that say it's completely fine to be employed full-time by the church. I should especially say that as my wife is. So, it's totally okay. And Paul says, when he says that he does it so it's not to get in the way of the gospel, he does say, I'm putting away what I sort of rightly deserve, almost, what is right for me to have. So it's sort of a personal preference thing for Paul, and it's sort of a personal preference thing for me. But, yeah, the many, it blows my mind. But so we said about personal profit for like monetary type reasons, and that's sort of self-explanatory, but I was thinking personal profit doesn't necessarily mean money. So you get people who might be preaching to be the important guy up the front, or to be respected, to gain influence, to have a platform, to sort of lord it over people, or even, and I wrote this one and it made myself sad, to be seen. If I'm up the front, then people will see me, and people will maybe be my friend. And as I wrote that, I was like, well, am I right? This is making me sad. But people can have all these kind of reasons for doing what I'm doing now, in effect, but they can all be terrible or sad. So Paul is saying we're not doing it for the wrong reasons. We're not doing it for monetary value. We're not doing it to be like the important, well-known people, or to be respected or whatever. They're doing it because they believe in what they are saying. They go on to say, as men of sincerity, they are authentic. They truly believe what they are saying. They believe that they have something from God that they want to impart to people, and they want them to do well and know God better and grow in all that gifting and character and all that stuff. And they're commissioned by God, which is really important. And I was thinking about people in the Old Testament, and no one, as far as I'm aware, it seems unlikely to me that Abraham, when he was Abram, was writing, "Dear diary, I would like to leave my home and everything I know and everything I have and go on a massive adventure." He didn't write that. God said, "Get up, off you go," and he went. Moses, when called by God, went, "I don't want to go speak to Pharaoh. Can I bring this guy?" Gideon, "Arise, mighty soldier," who was a guy hiding away in a wine press. All the people who God seemed to choose were actually not people who were seeking these things out. Even Paul himself was, by all definitions, a pretty bad dude. He was hunting down people in the church and being generally horrible, And so, Paul, what made him do what he did was he had an encounter with Jesus, and Jesus said, "Stop that, you work for me now." It's the commissioning, the calling by God is what made them do what they were going to do, and that's what was really important. So, are we beginning to praise ourselves again is how this started. We haven't got past verse 1 yet. So, it kind of feels like a little bit, doesn't it? If I'm honest, you said, we smell amazing, we're not like those guys, and we've had this great calling from God. A little bit. It sounds like it to me. Are people, yeah? A little bit. So, I just thought that was a bit off. Anyway, it says, go on to say, are we like others who need to bring you letters of recommendation or who ask to write such letters on their behalf? Surely not. And what's interesting here is you can hear Paul's indignation. He's like, why are we having to do this? Why are you expecting us to write letters of recommendation? And it was something very personal to Paul and Timothy. But it's worth noting that letters of recommendation are not a bad thing. And actually, there's other points in the Bible where Paul is noted for having written letters of recommendation, or would be saying to people, "Hey, I'm sending you this guy, he's really awesome," in the actual letter itself. So Paul did that. So that was a completely normal and acceptable practice. So why is it that he's so why are you doing this, Corinthians? What's wrong with you? Why is he like that? So does anyone know who this is? And before you answer, let me just clarify, it is not the live action version of the old guy from Up. Okay. So anyone else tell me who this is?
Terry Virgo.
Terry Virgo! Yes. So anyone know what did Terry Virgo do, Sam? Started New Frontiers. Yeah, so our church is part of a group of churches called Catalyst, which is one of the spheres which are connected with New Frontiers, which Terry effectively started many moons ago. And in November, I went to a leadership meeting for Catalyst in, where did I go? Worcester. I'm so bad with geography. And Terry was there, and he was talking and preaching and sharing God's word. And you know what I really expect didn't happen? Is that the people who organised that event, I doubt very much they wrote and said, oh, we'd like you to come preach, but can you bring some letters of recommendation to have people sort of vouch for you and who you are? Because the only reason everyone was in that room was because Terry founded New Frontiers a million years ago. It would have been completely bonkers. And it's the same thing for Paul here, saying to the Corinthians, why do you need a letter of recommendation? Because they know him. He's like the guy who founded their church. It's completely bonkers. It's like if Andrew got back from sabbatical and we said, oh, you know, we've been doing this series, could you give us some references before we carry on and let you preach? It's bonkers, you know, because it just makes no sense. Like, everyone following on that is just a bit bonkers. So, Paul pretty much says that, in effect, says the only letter of recommendation we need is you yourselves. Your lives are a letter written in our hearts. And I like that. It's really poetic, isn't it? It's nice. The our is in italics because the Greek is kind of weird on that. It's possibly your, but it's just a bit strange, so I thought I'd make a note of that. But the meaning is the same, sort of. Paul has, you know, been involved in the writing of letters in people's hearts, which is really good. But it carries on to say, everyone can read it and recognise our good work among you. Clearly, you are a letter from Christ, showing the result of our ministry among you. So he's not claiming credit or authorship of the letter that has been written in people's hearts. I thought that's really interesting. So I was like, what's he trying to say here? What is Paul and what Timothy, what are they trying to get across? And then during the week, well, it was Monday actually, wasn't it? So Monday to Thursday, Heather was at Cardinal Newman, doing something called Jesus Live, which is sort of having loads of tablets and tech and then talking to people about Jesus, which was really cool. And because it was tech related, I got roped in to help set things up on the Monday morning. Like, hey John, how would you like to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and come help set up a load of things? So like, great. But while I was down there, they had a board at the back. I think it was an RE class or is it RE or RS now? I always get confused. RE? Okay. I'm never sure if it's religious education or religious studies. I think some schools call it different things. But at the back, they had a wall of quotes. And one of them really jumped out at me, and it was this one. I'm a little pencil in the hand of a writing God who is sending a love letter to the world. I was like, okay, yep, that's pretty much exactly what Paul is trying to say here. He's saying that God used me as the instrument for writing on, like, the letter of love on people's hearts. I thought, that is so it. And that is us too. We can be little pencils in the hand of a writing God, writing love letters into people's hearts. Isn't that awesome? Nod is good. I'll come back to that later on. So it says, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts. What does tablets of stone make people think of? Commandments, yes. I'm glad it wasn't just me. That's good. So he's saying it's not like the old covenant. It's not like the rules and regulations that we used to have. And in terms of these letters, it's weird because they're called letters of recommendation, but for Paul and Timothy, they become letters of requirement almost. And he's saying that's so law and that's so much old red tape that we kind of got rid of. We don't need to create unnecessary rules for things anymore because we're all about relationship in the Spirit and knowing and loving one another, or each other, either one, but not the same, joined together because that's weird words. But it's saying it's not like it was, and I didn't want to touch too much on the difference between the Old Covenant and the New Covenant because that's pretty much, I think, going to be the heart of next week's talk. But for me, the Old Covenant was very much, you need to meet requirements, and the New Covenant was, you need to meet Jesus. You know, that is just really, really dumbed down. That's what it came across as to me. And these letters were weirdly requirements that had been come out of nowhere. So it says, we are confident of all this because of our great trust in God through Christ. And I really like that because Paul's effectively, and maybe Timothy, it's hard to work out who's writing necessarily because it always says we, so it's sort of probably Paul writing, but with Timothy there. And it says, we're confident of all this, which is basically going, I'm pretty sure that everything I've just said is right, which is quite fun. But it says, because of our great trust in God through Christ, and it's about that, he's got confidence in the Spirit at work in people's lives, that God speaking into people's hearts and writing these letters of love, more so than all the red tape and nonsense that can sometimes come along. And then he says, it's not that we think we are qualified to do anything on our own, our qualification comes from God. So jumping back to last week again, Ryan sort of had this almost rhetorical question in there somewhere, which was, who is adequate for this task? I don't know if you spotted that, but this is almost like the answer to that. He says, we don't think we are, which is, no worries. We don't think we're qualified from this task. Our qualification comes from God. And I had a weird thing in, I think was it I believe in November? Yeah. So in November I did a talk at Ryan's work at Atlantic College, or Fancy Schmancy School, as I call it. And I had to introduce myself. So I was like, this was my intro slides, like, hi, I'm John, I'm a web developer, ethical hacker, church leader, I'm married to a wonderful woman, have a cute dog. And then sort of along the bottom is kind of like my qualifications, which are, certified ethical hacker, I've got a Mickey Mouse degree from the London College of Music, and at some point I passed some exams to do with nerdy codey stuff. But nowhere in that does it say, and went to Bible college for 3 years and holds a master's in theology. It doesn't say Dr. John Ryan or Professor John Ryan, and some of the people that Ryan had coming to talk at this thing were like well-known people with degrees coming out of their ears and all sorts of really fancy job titles. I'm like, are you sure, Ryan? Are you sure you want me to come do this? Are you sure? Because I felt massively unqualified. And the thing is, it doesn't matter, because what matters is that they've been called by God. So the disciples themselves, this is one of my favourite verses in, I think, the whole Bible, which is, when talking about the disciples, it says, they were unschooled, ordinary men. I love that. They were ordinary people. They were just normal guys. And our friend Sam Ward points out that the Greek for ordinary is hilariously idiotai, which is brilliant, isn't it? They were not the smartest, they were not the sharpest tools in the shed, they were just normal dudes. They were guys who weren't the cream of the crop. They didn't have doctorates and degrees and masters and everything. They were just normal guys. And I think I mentioned in one of my previous talks about sort of this stuff that the Jewish people went through, where they'd learn like whole books of the Bible off by heart and memorize them and be able to retell them, and then if they succeeded in that, they'd like progress to the equivalent, I guess, of secondary school or whatever, and they'd learn the next section of scripture, and then learn this sort of answering a question with a question thing that Jesus does all the time. And then the absolute cream of the crop would get discipled by a rabbi. They'd like apply, it's like applying to university, go, please, may I go, I'm this person. And then a rabbi would go, all right, then you can come follow me. That's not what Jesus did. He went and he said, come follow me, to fishermen and tax collectors and people who had flunked out of this system. They were not the cream of the crop. They were, idiotai. They were the normal guys. And so what was really important was that they were called by God. And that's why Paul says, our qualification comes from God. And it's so easy to write yourself off in human sort of terms and think, I don't have this. I've seen other people with this, so I must need this too. Or I have to be like this person, or I have to do this thing in this way. But actually the most important thing is your qualification from God. Your calling from God to do whatever it is you've been called to do. That's what really matters. And so for me, I almost had to remind myself of that when I did the believe thing. Because has anyone heard of imposter syndrome? Yeah, that can creep in really easily. So just to remind yourself that, God actually uses everyday, ordinary people to do incredible things. And sort of, reminding yourself of that. So this is probably the nerdiest slide that I've ever had in a preach. Thank you very much. God says, I choose you. And so this is a thing from Pokemon where the protagonist, Ash, always, when he chooses his Pokemon, is like, Pikachu, I choose you. And goes. And his choices are sometimes questionable. He'll see, effectively, Pokemon is basically rock, paper, scissors. And you'll have like a fire type, and then you'll have something that's like a grass type, and you don't send the fire type or grass type against fire type because it will just burn it up, effectively. And he did stuff like that all the time. But God's not like that. He's not going to go, I choose you, and you be the wrong choice. God gets it right every single time. He is perfect in his decision making. And if he's called you to something, it's because you're the right person for that job. He knows exactly who you are, what you're capable of, and will make the right choice every single time. So I just wanted to finish with going back to this. is that I'm a little pencil in the hand of a writing God who is sending a love letter to the world. And if there's one thing I wanted you to take away today, it's this, which is why... Oh, send things everywhere. I have brought along some little pencils. And what I would like you to do is I want all of you to take a little pencil and a Sharpie and write your name on it, and then stick it somewhere where you'll occasionally spot it to remind yourself that you can be used by God. That it doesn't matter how qualified you are in earthly terms, God can use you. So I haven't thought about how to do this necessarily. Maybe if I pass the box around and then some Sharpies afterwards. Wait, could you open that for me? And send some pens round. Some pens. There's a pen. Pen. So yeah, just write it on it. And if you, unfortunately, you can't order these in packs of like 30 or 40, so there's like 144 in there or something stupid. So if you think, I've got a friend or someone at home who really needs to know this, that they can be used by God, and actually that would be something that they could really do with hearing right now, I would encourage you, grab an extra one or two, write their names on it too, and then give that to them. So that's it for that bit of scripture for me today. I hope that has encouraged you, and I just want to pray for you before we go back into worship. And I think I managed to get through that without my notes relatively well, so probably. But Father, I thank you that you are a God who calls us, that you are a God who has plans and purposes for us, and that you never make mistakes, that you call the right people for the right tasks. I just pray that you'll help us when we have sort of imposter syndrome or that kind of thing, that you'll help remind us that anyone can be used by you, and that many of the people who were used by you throughout the whole of the Bible were people who thought, are you sure, God? Surely not me. So I just pray that you will help us to remember that you've given us your spirit, that you have given us your love, and that we are capable of doing incredible things for you and with you. So I just pray that as the week goes on, that occasionally we'd spot our little pencils and go, yeah, I can be used by God. I'm a little pencil in the hand of a writing God who wants to write love letters to the world. And may we be that. May we encounter people this week who will be able to express your love for, that will be able to show that you're a God who loves them. And I just pray that you'll be with us as we continue to worship, as we lift your name and worship you in all your wonderfulness. Amen.